The snow was falling in thick, soft sheets the night I returned to my parents' house for Christmas dinner, coating the mountains in the kind of quiet that made you believe peace still existed somewhere. But peace had never lived inside that house. Not for me. Not for a long time. I stepped through the doorway carrying a bottle of wine and the hope that maybe, just maybe, this year wouldn't hurt the way the others had. My mother barely met my eyes. My father didn't even stand. And Vanessa's chair, always decorated with some delicate little ribbon or bow, sat empty. No one offered an explanation. I should have known then that something was coming, something sharp and heavy and inevitable. But I stayed. I sat. I smiled when expected. I let the warmth from the fireplace brush my face and pretended it could thaw the cold between us. Dessert had just been set down when my father slid a thick envelope across the table toward me, the way a banker might slide overdue notices to a delinquent client. "You'll pay your sisters $280,000, he said, voice steady, emotionless. "Tomorrow." My fork froze in midair. I stared at him, at the envelope, at the silence settling over the table like dust. "I'm sorry, what family comes first?" he added, as if reciting scripture, as if that explained everything. I felt something inside me tighten, then go still. A familiar stillness, the kind that always arrived seconds before one of Harold Brooks's commands. Vanessa still hadn't shown up. My mother's hands were trembling, and my father waited unblinking, certain of my obedience. Instead of arguing, I simply smiled and said, "All right." They thought they had cornered me. They had no idea this was the last night I'd ever let them. I kept chewing my dessert like nothing had happened, letting the sugary sweetness coat the bitterness rising in my chest. My mother tried to soften the air by asking about my job, her voice wavering, eyes darting back to my father for approval. I nodded politely, pretending not to notice the tension in her jaw. Every word she spoke felt like it was balancing on a fault line. "Where's Vanessa?" I finally asked, keeping my tone light. My father's expression snapped tight. "Not your concern. No explanation. No apology. Just a shut door." It was enough to confirm what the uneaten pie on Vanessa's plate already suggested. My sister was in deeper trouble than anyone wanted to admit. I slipped the envelope into my lap, opening it beneath the tablecloth. Loan agreements, debt notices, bank authorizations. And there it was, my own signature. Perfect. Flawless. Absolutely forged. I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. I had learned young that emotion only fueled Harold's conviction that he was right. My mother kept glancing at me as if waiting for me to break down. I didn't. The stillness inside me only grew colder, clearer. Excusing myself, I stepped out onto the deck. The cold night air hit my lungs like truth, brutal but cleansing. Snow crunched under my boots. I looked out at the dark tree line and remembered a time when Vanessa and I used to run toward those woods, laughing, not away from them, in fear. "You don't need that money, Elise. You live alone. You're the strong one. You'll handle it." They'd said those things my entire life, praise disguised as chains. The truth landed quietly but firmly. If I paid this debt, if I surrendered again, I would never be free. Harold would use me as long as he needed to, and Vanessa, poor, terrified Vanessa, would continue sinking into whatever mess she had been lured into. "No more," I whispered to the trees. When I returned to the table, my face was calm. Too calm. My father took it as obedience. My mother took it as relief. Both were wrong. "I'll take care of it in the morning," I said smoothly. Harold nodded with a satisfaction that made my stomach twist. He thought he had won. He thought the quiet daughter he'd spent decades shaping into a tool would once again carry the weight of the family's sins. But I watched him differently now. Watched his hands clenched too tightly on his wine glass. Watched my mother's eyes shimmering with secrets she'd never been brave enough to say aloud. Watched the empty chair where my sister should have been. This wasn't about a debt. It wasn't even about Vanessa. Something deeper was rotting at the center of my family, something they expected me to shoulder blindly. I stood when dinner ended, hugged no one, said nothing more than a polite goodnight. But as I walked across the icy driveway toward my car, I felt the first breath of real freedom rise in me. By tomorrow morning, I would be gone, and they wouldn't know where to find me. If they wanted to corner me, they should have made sure I had no way out. But I always did. They just never looked closely enough. The road home blurred beneath my headlights as midnight folded over the mountains, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I kept seeing Harold's face, calm, confident, utterly certain I would obey. I had obeyed my entire life. That was the part that stung the most. Not the forged signature, not the demand, but the realization that my father had never doubted for a second that I would sacrifice myself for the family again. Snow whispered against the windshield as I drove toward my townhouse, a small place I'd bought 5 years ago with savings no one knew I had. A secret life inside a life, though I never meant for it to be that way. I parked, stepped inside, and locked the door behind me with trembling but determined hands. I didn't turn on the main lights. I didn't want comfort. I wanted clarity. Moving through the dim glow of a kitchen lamp, I gathered what I needed: my fireproof document box, my old laptop with the secure software Abby once helped me install, and the metal case where I kept every financial record since the day I left home. I spread everything across my dining table, the hum of the heater masking the rhythm of my breathing. When I opened the envelope Harold had given me, the forged signature stared back like a mocking smile. I scanned it into the program. The results arrived seconds later. 99.7% match to a previous signature. But not mine. Someone had copied my handwriting, my curve of each letter, my spacing. Someone had practiced me. A cold wave moved down my spine. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. This wasn't an impulsive act born from panic. This was prepared, planned. My father had been setting the stage long before Christmas dinner. I checked my credit report next. A red alert appeared instantly, an inquiry from a financial institution I'd never used, time-stamped at 11:30 that morning, hours before Christmas dinner. Someone had tried to open a line of credit under my name. I swallowed hard. They were getting ready. I whispered into the quiet. They already started. The heaviness in my chest wasn't fear, it was betrayal settling into its final shape. I called Abby. Her voice, warm and steady, grounded me. Send me everything. Encrypted like before. Don't wait. I followed each step she gave me. When she saw the documents, her tone sharpened. Elise, this isn't just a forged signature. This is identity fraud. If more documents exist with your name on them, and there probably are, you could be legally tied to whatever your sister signed. I closed my eyes. So they really meant for me to take the fall. Elise, she added quietly, someone wanted you to be the one holding the liability, and your disappearance tomorrow would have made it easier to claim you were unstable. My throat tightened. Harold rewriting reality. Harold turning weakness into narrative. He'd done it all my life, but this was a new level. After the call, a memory surfaced, sharp, unwanted. I was 19, asking Harold why my college fund was suddenly smaller than expected. He smiled, laid a hand on my shoulder, and said, "You're the strong one. Your sister needed help. You'll make it work." I always did. That was the problem. I stood from the table and walked upstairs, pulling out a suitcase I hadn't used since a short work trip 2 years ago. I packed deliberately essentials only. Clothes, medications, identification, cash, my passport. I hesitated over a framed photo of Vanessa and me as children, arms around each other, grinning with missing teeth. I left it behind. The past had already taken more of me than I intended to give. Back downstairs, I powered off my phone, pulled the SIM card, and dropped both into a drawer. I transferred my remaining funds into a secure secondary account no one knew about. Then I printed copies of everything, every forged document, every alert, every transaction, and sealed them in an envelope addressed to Harold. Not a letter, a message. The heater clicked off, leaving the townhouse silent. I walked room to room, taking one last look at the life I built, quiet, small, but mine. A life my family assumed they still had the right to control. My phone buzzed on the table, flickering with notifications before it died completely. I ignored it. I knew who it was. My mother. "Come back. We need to talk. Tonight." Panic disguised as love. It always came in that form. I zipped my suitcase, took a breath, and whispered to the empty room, "No more." As I stepped outside, the night had gone still. Snow covered the world in white, but nothing felt pure. Not anymore. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. Halfway down the street, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. A dark SUV. Not close. Not following. Just there. Watching. I blinked, and it turned at the next block, vanishing into the snow. Maybe nothing. Or maybe the first sign that I wasn't the only one moving in the night. I drove toward the state line, heart steady, breath even. My life had been slowly taken from me piece by piece, but tonight I was taking it back. And by the time the sun rose, I would be gone. The next morning, long before the sun rose over Colorado, Harold and my mother arrived at my townhouse. I knew the exact moment they reached my porch, because the doorbell camera I'd disconnected hours earlier sent a final archived ping to my secure inbox. 3 sharp rings, impatient, entitled unmistakably, "My Father's Rhythm." I sat in a quiet hotel room 3 states away and watched them through the preserved footage, my suitcase beside me, my coffee cooling untouched at my side. On the screen, my mother stepped back from the door, hugging her coat tight, her breath forming nervous clouds in the cold. Harold, however, didn't bother with hesitation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the spare key, the one he'd insisted on keeping for emergencies, though the emergencies were always his. He jammed it into the lock and pushed the door open, as if he still owned the place. My townhouse lights flicked on when he entered, illuminating everything I intentionally left exactly where it belonged. But the absence of what he expected was louder than anything present. I watched as he scanned the living room. The coffee table was bare. The chair where I always draped my work bag was empty. The small shelf of books I kept by the window half cleared out. Evidence, my father would call it. But it wasn't evidence of guilt. It was evidence of exit. "What is this?" my mother whispered behind him. "Her things. Some of them are gone. She left in a hurry," he muttered. He was wrong. I hadn't hurried. I had planned every step with the kind of precision you learn only after years of walking on emotional eggshells. They moved toward the kitchen, and Harold stopped abruptly. The single cream-colored envelope sat on the table, placed exactly in the center like a tiny landmine. He snatched it up and tore it open. My mother leaned closer as he read the short message I'd written at midnight. "You asked for everything. I owe you nothing." Below the line, I had clipped a copy of the forged signature and the credit inquiry notification he hadn't expected me to find. On the hotel footage, Harold's face drained of color. My mother reached for his arm, but he shrugged her off and stormed through the house, yanking open drawers, slamming cabinets, searching for something, anything he could still control. "What are you looking for?" my mother asked in a trembling voice. "The documents," he snapped. "They were in the drawer. She took them." Of course I had. The days of leaving evidence for him to twist were over. My mother glanced at the empty file cabinet, her hand covering her mouth. "Harold, what did you do?" For a moment he looked almost human, frightened, cornered. Then he straightened and said, "She's unstable. She must be. There's no other explanation." But even on my pixelated footage I could see he didn't believe his own words. He attempted to call Vanessa next, pacing as his voice grew sharp and nervous. But her phone went straight to voicemail. My mother's eyes filled with dread. "She was terrified when she came home," she whispered. "She said someone had been following her. You told me not to mention it to Elise. You said I said Harold interrupted, that I had it under control." My mother rarely raised her voice, but she did now. Do you really? He ignored her and moved to the window, scanning the street. A neighbor approached, cautiously bundled in a winter coat. Everything all right, Mr. Brooks? The neighbor asked. I saw a dark SUV driving by your daughter's place around 2 a.m. Slow. Real slow. Someone knocked on her door too. My mother's face went sheet white. Harold dismissed the neighbor with a forced chuckle he'd perfected over years of hiding rot under charm. He waited until the man walked away before cursing under his breath. They weren't the only ones looking for me. That confirmed more than I wanted it to. Harold called his attorney next. I listened from the hotel as his voice shifted, first demanding, then desperate, then furious as he learned I had blocked his conservatorship attempt before he even filed it. Abby had been faster than he anticipated. She's not mentally unstable, the attorney insisted, and even if she were, the evidence she submitted makes your petition look retaliatory. Harold slammed the phone down so hard the camera shook. My mother stepped back, watching him unravel, and whispered, "Harold, what else have you done?" But if she expected an answer, she didn't get one. He walked through the house again, slower this time, taking in the missing items, the sealed envelope, the silent rooms. My absence filled the space louder than my presence ever had. The control he wore like a second skin began cracking at the edges. The final footage that played before the camera cut off was my mother sinking into the kitchen chair, her hands covering her face, while Harold stood rigid beside her, gripping the envelope I'd left like it was a grenade. His voice was barely audible. "She thinks she can run." He was wrong again. I hadn't run. I'd removed myself from his reach. Hours later, in my hotel room miles away, I closed my laptop and let the silence settle around me. I had spent 30 years being the obedient daughter, the reliable one, the one who could handle it, the one whose worth came from carrying burdens no one else wanted. Watching them tear through my empty house, I felt something strange. Not guilt, not fear, relief. For the first time in my life, my father no longer knew where I was. And for the first time, I didn't care. Portwell smelled like salt and cold wind when I arrived just before sunrise, the ocean a gray ribbon behind the mist. I parked near a weather-beaten motel, the kind with peeling blue paint, and a metal vacancy sign that buzzed faintly in the quiet. It wasn't glamorous, but it was invisible. That was all I needed. I stepped out of the car, pulled my coat tighter around me, and let the stillness settle into my bones. For the first time in days, maybe in years, I could breathe without feeling watched. Inside the small room, I turned on the lamp beside the bed and sat down with my prepaid phone, the one that held no history, no contacts, nothing traceable. I activated the VPN, set up the encrypted email Abby taught me to use, and began checking every account I still owned. So far, nothing had been touched since I froze them. But then a notification appeared, an attempted credit inquiry at 5:22 that morning. I sat up straighter. "Someone's still trying," I murmured. I wasn't scared, not yet. But it confirmed what I'd already sensed: Harold wasn't the only threat anymore. By mid-morning, I walked to a small cafe facing the marina. Seagulls shrieked overhead while fishermen loaded bait onto their boats. The air smelled like diesel and brine, oddly comforting in its honesty. I chose a corner booth and dialed the only person I trusted enough to see me disappear, Nora. She arrived 10 minutes later, her dark curls pinned up in a messy twist, a wool coat wrapped tight around her petite frame. When she spotted me, she froze, then hurried over and practically collapsed into the seat across from me. "Elise," she breathed. "Jesus, what happened to you?" Everything in me softened at the sound of her voice. Nora had always been able to see through the armor I built. I told her everything. The Christmas dinner, the forged signature, the missing documents, Vanessa's empty chair, the SUV, the attempted credit inquiries. I didn't sugarcoat any of it. By the time I finished, Nora's coffee had gone cold. She leaned back, exhaling. "This isn't family drama. This is coordinated financial manipulation. Elise, they set you up. Her certainty hit harder than any blow Harold had delivered. I stared out at the waves. What am I supposed to do? You don't face them alone, she said simply. For the first time in days, I almost believed safety existed. Nora reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. Do you remember Vanessa mentioning a man she was dating last year? The mysterious investor. I nodded. Barely. She hung up on me when I asked about him. Nora opened the notebook. One of my clients tried to invest with someone linked to Hale Consortium, big reputation, aggressive strategies. Your sister's name came up in their due diligence. It triggered multiple red flags. I turned toward her sharply. You're saying Vanessa was involved with them. I'm saying she was tangled in something she didn't understand. Nora paused. And someone with serious influence was covering for her. My stomach tightened. Harold. It had to be. Nora then asked for the voicemail I'd saved, the one Vanessa left months ago that ended in a whisper and a click. I handed her my phone. She pressed it to her ear, listening with the analytic focus I remembered from our business school days. That background hum, she murmured. Do you hear it? I listened again. A mechanical whir, steady, rhythmic. That's a server room cooling system, Nora said. Old, industrial. Hale used to have a building in Denver with that exact sound. Pieces shifted in my mind, falling into shape. So Vanessa wasn't lying. She was scared. She was trapped. Nora corrected. And frankly, Elise, so are you. The words should have terrified me. Instead, they fueled something steady inside my chest. Resolve. I pulled out the envelope I found in the storage drawer at home, an old voicemail transcription and a printed list of transactions my father must have overseen years ago. Nora scanned it. Someone's been grooming your financial identity for a long time. Harold, I whispered. Nora didn't argue. She only nodded. Her phone buzzed. She read the message and frowned. Julian can see you today. The name hit me with a mix of relief and apprehension. Julian Mercer, private investigator, former federal analyst, sharper than anyone I'd ever met. If Nora trusted him, he was my best chance at finding Vanessa. He asked one question, Nora added quietly. Are you sure you're ready for what you might learn? I have to be, I said. Running won't work anymore. We finished our coffees and stepped outside into the crisp afternoon. As we walked toward Nora's office so I could meet Julian, a fisherman who'd been unloading his gear earlier approached me. Excuse me, miss, he said gently. Were you the woman someone asked about this morning? I froze. Asked about? Yeah, he said. Tall guy in a dark jacket. Didn't give a name, just showed your picture. Nora's face drained. She grabbed my arm. Elise, she whispered, someone already knows you're here. A chill wind swept across the pier. My suitcase felt suddenly too small, the town too open, the ocean too wide. I didn't say anything, because the truth hit me all at once. Running had saved me once. But whoever sent that man, they were already close enough to touch the life I hadn't even begun to rebuild. The next morning, I woke to my prepaid phone vibrating against the thin motel nightstand. Abby's name flashed across the screen. I answered before the second ring. Elise, she said, her voice tight. Your father filed the emergency conservatorship petition at dawn. I sat up straight. He actually did it. He did more than that. He submitted fabricated mental health documents. He's trying to prove you're unstable and incapable of managing your finances. The room tilted for a moment. I pressed a hand to my forehead. He wants legal control over everything. Yes, she said. If he wins, he'll gain authority over your accounts, your property, even any debts he claims you owe. He could sign for you, pay what he wants, move assets, and it would all look legal. A coldness spread through me. He planned this. He planned it before Christmas, Abby said. I intercepted an email his attorney filed. He's claiming your disappearance is proof of emotional instability. I laughed softly, bitterly. Of course he is. Elise, she continued, we need to act fast. I'm filing a counter-affidavit this morning, but Harold is moving aggressively. He's scared. And when men like your father get scared, they get reckless. I thanked her and hung up, my pulse pounding not from fear, but from the sick familiarity of it all. Harold rewriting reality to make himself the hero. Harold deciding which version of me the world should believe. Harold calling control protection. I showered, dressed, and walked to Nora's office with my hood pulled low. As soon as I stepped inside, she waved me over to her computer. You need to see this. On the screen were screenshots, posts from extended relatives on Facebook. Pray for Elise. She's not well. The family is trying to help her get treatment. She ran from home and left us devastated. My stomach twisted. Nora clicked the next image, my mother's post. We love our daughter. We hope she finds clarity and returns soon. The comments were overflowing with sympathy for them, with judgment for me. I stared in disbelief. They're making me look unstable. That's the point, Nora said quietly. They're building a narrative so no one questions Harold's petition. I sank into a chair. It's working. Not on everyone, she said gently. But enough. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. A text from my cousin Megan, the only relative who had ever spoken to me without an agenda. Elise. I don't know what's happening, but your father is furious. He said if you don't come home today, he'll have the law bring you back. I felt the blood drain from my face. Nora leaned forward. Elise, what did he say? I showed her the message. She exhaled slowly. He's escalating. Hard. Before panic could root itself deeper, Abby called back. Good news, she said. Your affidavit is filed. It blocks the conservatorship for now. But this is temporary. We need to build a stronger defense. I closed my eyes. What do I do? You stay hidden, Abby said. You don't engage. Every time Harold tries something, he leaves a legal footprint. We will use it later. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. When the call ended, Nora placed a comforting hand on my arm. He's losing control, Elise. That's why he's lashing out. Before I could answer, Nora's phone chimed. She opened a police bulletin. Her eyes widened. Elise, Vanessa is officially reported missing. The world around me quieted. What she was last seen 2 days ago. No contact since. Nora swallowed. Your mother posted about it. She implied you abandoned Vanessa during a crisis. I shook my head. I haven't spoken to her in months. Exactly. And Harold knows that. He's using Vanessa's disappearance to frame you as unstable and irresponsible. My chest tightened painfully. Guilt and anger twisted into one vicious knot. Another notification appeared on my phone, an unknown number. You didn't protect her then. Will you protect her now? I stared at the message until the words blurred. This wasn't Harold. This was something else. Someone else. A chill crawled down my spine. Elise, Nora whispered. What is it? I showed her the text. She covered her mouth. This is Hale's tone. Indirect. Threatening. They want you afraid. They want you confused. I leaned back in my chair, pressing a hand to my heartbeat. They think I know something, or they think I have something. Or Nora said softly, they think you'll be the easiest one to blame. We walked to the window, needing air. Outside, the wind whipped between the buildings. That's when I saw it. The dark SUV, parked across the street, engine idling, windows black. My breath caught. It's the same one. Before we could blink, the SUV pulled away. Smooth, casual, practiced. Nora grabbed her coat. We need Julian. We hurried to meet him in his office. Julian listened quietly, his expression tightening as we recounted everything. When we finished, he folded his hands on the desk. They're not just watching you. They're waiting for you to slip. Slip, how I asked. Emotionally, legally, physically. Any weakness gives them an opening. I swallowed hard. And Vanessa. He exchanged a grim look with Nora. If she got too close to something she shouldn't have, they may be using her as leverage. The room felt colder. Abby called again, her voice urgent. Elise, brace yourself. Your father just tried to access your retirement account and your brokerage account. The betrayal didn't surprise me anymore. It only hardened something inside me. As we hung up, Julian looked at us both. There's something else. He showed us a printed photo, blurry, time-stamped at 2 a.m. Vanessa, standing beside a tall man whose face was shadowed, his hand gripping her arm. The text underneath the image was short. You're running out of time. She already did. My breath shuddered. For the first time, I wasn't sure whether my family or Hale's men would reach me first, and I didn't know which outcome would be worse. Abby called just after sunrise, her voice urgent, breathless, the way she only sounded when something had gone very, very wrong. Elise, I need you to listen carefully, she said. The debt isn't $280,000. My stomach tightened. How much is it? At least $600,000, possibly more. And your name appears on a second loan. Another forged signature. I pressed a hand to my forehead. So they planned to drown me completely. Elise, she continued, this wasn't Vanessa's doing. Someone positioned you as the legal fallback. Someone wanted you to carry the liability if everything collapsed. Someone. But we both knew who. When the call ended, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the floor, letting the truth settle into its full shape. This wasn't desperation from my father. This was strategy. A long, calculated preparation. The kind of move only a man who believed he owned everything, including his daughters, would make. Nora arrived 20 minutes later with her hair still damp and a laptop tucked under her arm. She didn't bother with greetings. You need to see this, she said, opening her screen. Rows of data filled it, transactions, shell companies, payments routed through names I didn't recognize. But Vanessa's name appeared over and over, and mine hidden in corners tied to accounts I'd never opened. Nora pointed at a highlighted row. This shell company, it's directly linked to Hale Consortium. And here, see this? Your father moved money into this structure for years. Small amounts, quiet amounts, but consistent. Why, I whispered. To prepare, she said. To make you the liability holder if things went bad. I felt dizzy. Harold hadn't wanted me to help Vanessa. He had wanted me to shield him. Before I could respond, Julian called. I found the storage facility, he said. The one Vanessa went to. She wasn't alone. The man from your porch camera was with her. A chill crawled up my arms. Was she forced? I can't say for sure. But she didn't come out alone. He paused. Elise. Someone moved her. The motel room suddenly felt too small. After the call, I opened my old financial archive passwords I hadn't touched in years. When I checked dormant accounts, I found withdrawals I never made, transfers I never approved, accounts opened with my name but a different mailing address. Harold, I whispered. He's been preparing this for a long time. Nora didn't argue. She didn't need to. Then my phone buzzed again. An encrypted email this time. Sender unknown. Do not trust anyone connected to your family. Vanessa tried. Look where she is now. Attached was a single image, Vanessa sitting at a conference table signing documents while a man, face blurred, stood behind her. The caption below the image read, Hale never lets his investments walk away. My fingers trembled slightly. I wasn't sure if it was fear or anger or both. Elise, Nora said softly, You're not dealing with ordinary criminals. This is organized, controlled, and collapsing. As if summoned by her words, the dark SUV reappeared outside her office window, parked on the opposite curb, engine running. Same shape, same tinted glass. This time, it didn't look at me. It looked at Nora. Get away from the window, Julian said over speakerphone when we called him immediately. They may not just be watching you anymore. We stepped back. Lights dimmed. When we peeked again, the SUV was gone, a ghost disappearing into broad daylight. Back in the office, Abby joined by video call. "I've reviewed everything she said. You have two options: continue hiding or confront Harold strategically after we gather enough evidence to protect you." "I'm done hiding," I said. "If I want answers, he'll give them." Nora looked uneasy. "He won't tell the truth willingly. He will if he thinks I'm confused. Or scared." I took a steady breath. He underestimates me too much not to talk. Abby hesitated. "If you go through with this, you need to record everything. Elise, once he knows you're not compliant, he may turn more dangerous." I nodded. "He already has." Nora squeezed my hand. "We're with you. Every step." That warmth almost broke me. I wasn't used to being supported. I wasn't used to anyone fighting beside me instead of against me. Julian called again that afternoon. "Elise, I found something else." "What now?" "The storage facility. One of the owners listed is your sister, but there's a second name attached." He paused. "Yours." My breath hitched. "Mine?" "Yes. A duplicate of your signature. This wasn't just Vanessa's hideout. They planned to tie you to whatever was stored there." "Planned," I echoed. "Years ago," he confirmed. "This wasn't sudden. Someone wove your name into this web long before you ever saw the first forged document." I stood in the middle of Nora's office as the truth slotted into place. Harold hadn't used me in a moment of panic. He had been grooming me for this role for years. The reliable daughter, the obedient one, the perfect scapegoat. My voice came out steady. "So Vanessa wasn't the only one trapped?" "No," Julian said. "You were always part of the design." The room fell silent around us, the air thick and heavy with betrayal. And for the first time since fleeing home, I understood something terrifying. They didn't just want my money. They wanted my identity, my signature, my future, my freedom. And they were willing to take it piece by piece until there was nothing left of me but the debts they needed me to hold. Julian drove us to the storage facility just after dusk, the sky still faintly pink behind the warehouses. The place sat on the edge of Portwell rows of metal units, each door painted a dull green, the kind of property no one looks at twice. Perfect for hiding something you never wanted found. He parked near the far corner. "Your unit is number 74, he said. "Technically, your unit. Forged signature and all." My throat tightened. "And Vanessa?" "Her name is on the adjoining lease. 75. We stepped out. The wind cut sideways, sharp and unforgiving. I pulled my jacket closer as Julian punched in the access code he'd retrieved legally, though I didn't ask how. The gate buzzed, then creaked open. Inside, the air smelled like dust and metal. Nora walked beside me, clutching her tablet. "We shouldn't stay long," she murmured. "If Hale has people watching any of these units—" "I know," I whispered. "Let's just see what they wanted tied to me." We found Unit 74. The lock looked new. Too new. Someone had changed it recently. Julian knelt to inspect it. "This isn't the lock listed on the original lease," he said. "Meaning someone accessed it after you disappeared." A cold ripple moved through me. "Can you open it?" Julian didn't answer. He just pulled a small tool from his coat, a universal bolt cutter, and snapped the lock cleanly. The door rolled upward with a groan. At first, the unit looked abandoned. Dusty shelves, a metal table, 2 cardboard boxes shoved in the corner. But Julian's flashlight swept across the far wall and landed on something that made my breath catch. A stack of file boxes. Labeled. B. Investments. Hale V. Brooks E. Misk. Ledgers. Credit agreements. Elise. Nora whispered, stepping closer. "Your father's name. Your sister's. And yours." My hands trembled as I lifted the lid from the top box. Inside were contracts full, notarized, stamped. Loans tied to Vanessa's name. others tied to mine. But the signatures, they weren't even good forgeries. Rushed sloppy signed by someone who didn't care whether the copy matched the original. Julian scanned several documents, his expression darkening. This is a paper trail designed to collapse onto you if anything went wrong. I stared at a loan agreement in my shaking hands, my throat tightening. They wanted to make me the financial mule, I said. The disposable one. Nora gently took the paper from me. Not disposable. Controllable. Julian moved deeper into the unit and pointed his flashlight at the metal table. A recorder sat on top. Small, cheap, with a cracked edge like someone dropped it. He pressed play. Static filled the room. Then a familiar voice broke through Vanessa's. "Please, I told you I don't have anything else. You said it was handled. You said Elise didn't need to know." I staggered slightly. My own name spoken like fear. Then a man spoke. The same voice from the blurred photo. Calm. Cold. "You're not hearing me, Vanessa. Brooks isn't paying enough. Someone has to cover the rest. That's what Elise is for." My breath left my body. Vanessa choked on a sob. "She's my sister. She's an asset," he replied. "And assets get used." Julian clicked off the recorder. For a moment, none of us moved. The dim unit held its own silence, thick and terrible. I finally found my voice. So they were planning to shift the debt onto me from the beginning. "Yes," Julian said. "Years before Vanessa ever fell into trouble. Anger spread through me, not hot but freezing cold, clarifying. How many people knew I asked?" Julian hesitated. "More than you want to imagine." Before I could respond, Nora called from the other side of the unit. "Elise, you need to see this." She held up a folder. Inside were photos, my driver's license, my signature samples, old addresses, my employment history, the kind of file you build when you're preparing to impersonate someone. Julian swore softly. "Identity prep materials. They plan to become you on paper." I leaned against the wall to steady myself. My mind raced, flipping through years of small moments, Harold insisting on keeping my birth certificate for safekeeping. My mother asking for my old signatures for holiday cards. Vanessa brushing off questions about strange mail addressed to me. It wasn't incompetence. It was grooming. Slow, patient, intentional. The sound of footsteps cut the air. Julian stiffened. Nora's eyes widened. We hadn't closed the unit door behind us. A shadow moved across the pavement outside. Slow, purposeful. Julian motioned for silence and stepped in front of me. The footsteps stopped just beyond the open doorway. No voice. No attempt to enter. Someone was listening. Nora mouthed a single word, SUV. Julian reached for the storage door to slam it shut, but before he could, a smooth, almost polite male voice spoke from the darkness. "Miss Brooks," he said, "you're making this harder than it needs to be." My pulse thundered. He knew my name. He knew I was here. The voice continued, still calm. "Hale wants closure, that's all." Vanessa understood that. "You can too." Julian grabbed the metal door and yanked it down. The slam echoed like a gunshot. Nora whispered, "He found us." Julian bolted the door. "We're leaving the back way. Now." Through the thin metal wall, the man's final words reached us, soft, almost conversational. "You can't run forever, Elise." My knees trembled, because for the first time I believed him. We slipped out the rear exit of the storage compound, the metal door clanging softly behind us. The sky had shifted from pale lavender to deep blue, the last traces of sunlight fading into the horizon. Julian urged us to stay low as we crossed the narrow alley behind the units. Every shifting shadow felt like a presence. Every rustle of wind sounded like footsteps. When we reached his car, he unlocked it remotely, scanned the lot twice, and motioned us inside. The ride back to Portwell was silent at first. Nora sat rigid beside me, her hands shaking slightly in her lap. I stared out the window, watching the storage facility shrink into a patchwork of flickering lights and cold steel. Finally, Julian spoke. "You weren't supposed to hear his voice," he said quietly. "Whoever that man was, he wasn't there for intimidation. He wanted to make contact." "Why?" My voice trembled despite my efforts. "What does Hale want from me now that I know what they've done?" Julian's jaw tightened. Everything Hale does has a purpose. Tonight wasn't random. Nora swallowed hard. It was a warning. "No," Julian corrected. "Warnings are meant to scare. That man was meant to test your reaction, to see whether you'd crumble or fight." I looked back toward the dark road behind us. "What did we tell him by running?" "That you're smarter than he expected," Julian said. "And that makes you a problem." The weight of those words pressed against my ribs. Vanessa had been a problem too. And look what happened to her. By the time we reached Nora's office, my phone had received 5 missed calls from Abby and 2 from her assistant. When I answered, Abby's voice burst through the speaker. "Elise, where were you? I've been trying to reach you. Something happened." My pulse spiked. "What now?" "Your father filed an emergency motion with the court." She said, breath uneven. "He claims you're being coerced by an unnamed party. He's using your disappearance as evidence that you're in danger and unable to manage your affairs. He's trying to paint me as a victim now," I said in disbelief. "No," Abby replied. "He's trying to regain control. He's arguing that until your safety is verified, all your accounts should be temporarily placed under his supervision." The room blurred slightly at the edges. "He can't win that," I whispered. "He won't," Abby said firmly. "Not if you stay hidden. The moment you appear publicly, he'll drag you into a legal cage you can't escape from." Julian caught my eyes. "Stay where you are." I ended the call and sat heavily in the nearest chair. Nora knelt beside me. "Elise, your father's desperation is growing. Everything is unraveling quicker than he can contain it." I rubbed my temples. Because of Vanessa. Because of Hale. And because Nora added softly, "You didn't follow the script he built for you." The office lights flickered overhead. The air felt too thin. Julian set a folder on the desk. "There's something you need to see." Inside were old bank statements, ones I'd never viewed before. Transfers made between Harold's accounts and several of the shell companies tied to Hale. The dates stretched back 5 years. I shook my head. "He was involved this long." Julian nodded. "Your father didn't get dragged in by accident. He sought them out, used them. And when Vanessa stepped into something too big, he used you as the insurance policy." I pressed a hand to my mouth. "Does my mother know?" Nora answered gently. "She knows pieces, but I don't think she understands the full picture, or she doesn't want to." I looked up. "Julian, what about Vanessa? Do you think she—" He held up a hand. "Before you finish that question, you need to know something." He pulled out a small flash drive. I retrieved a partial data dump from the unit. Only fragments, but one file shows Vanessa alive 4 days ago. Hope flared so quickly in my chest it hurt. "Alive," I breathed. "Yes," Julian said, "but not free." He showed us a blurry, still image, Vanessa in a dim room sitting at a small table, hands clasped tightly. She looked tired, scared, but alive. A man's silhouette stood in the doorway. My throat burned. "They're holding her." "That's my conclusion," Julian said. "She wasn't running. She was being controlled." I stared at the image until my eyes stung. My sister, imperfect, reckless, infuriating, was still my sister. And she was trapped in something because of choices she made, and choices our father forced on both of us. Nora placed a hand on my shoulder. "This means we can still get her back." "For now," Julian cautioned. "But once Hale realizes you've seen that unit, the stakes change." "They already changed," I said, voice firming. "Tonight proved that." Nora hesitated. "There's something else, Elise." When we left, I saw the man step toward the unit door. He didn't look surprised that the lock was broken. Julian nodded grimly, which means he may have expected us, or followed us. A shiver ran down my spine. So what now? I asked. I can't hide forever. Vanessa is out there somewhere, and Hale knows I'm looking. Julian leaned forward. The next step is controlled exposure. You reach out to your father, not in person, but in a way that makes him believe you're scared and uncertain. You draw information out of him. That's exactly what Abby said, I murmured. Because it's the only way, Julian replied. Your father will never tell the truth willingly, but if he thinks he's guiding you back under his control, he'll slip. And Hale? I asked. Julian's expression hardened. Hale only respects power. If we're going to challenge him, we need leverage. Evidence. Something he doesn't know we found. Nora tapped the metal table. The recorder, the ledgers, the files. Julian nodded. That might be enough. I took a slow breath, steadying the tremor inside me. So I pretend to be fragile, confused, afraid. I exhaled. I can do that. Nora gave me a worried look. Elise, this could be dangerous. It already is, I said. But running won't save Vanessa. Julian met my eyes. Then tonight we plan your call to Harold. And for the first time, the fear in my chest sharpened into something stronger. Resolve. Julian dimmed the lights in Nora's office until the room was cast in a soft amber glow. The darkness steadied me, made it easier to play the part I needed to play. My palms were damp despite the cool air. The burner phone sat on the desk between us, silent, waiting. Remember, Julian said quietly, your father thrives on weakness. Show him just enough fear to make him talk, not enough to make him reckless. I nodded, though my heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Nora squeezed my hand once. You're not alone in this. But when the phone buzzed to life, flashing my father's name, unknown caller. No doubt from whatever number he used to keep things untraceable, my body reacted the same way it always had around Harold Brooks. Cold, tight, terrified. Answer, Julian whispered. I picked up. Dad. My voice cracked perfectly. Too perfectly. Years of conditioning found their way to the surface. Elise. His voice was sharp, breathless. Where are you? I swallowed. I can't say. Elise. He repeated slower now. You need to come home. We can fix this. All of it. Fix this. As if I were a broken appliance. As if Vanessa were a spilled drink. As if the debt, the forged signatures, the lies were simply inconveniences he could tidy up with control and charm. I don't know who to trust anymore, I whispered. Silence stretched through the line, heavy, calculated. Then Harold exhaled long and disappointed. You're confused, he said. Someone's gotten into your head. I saw documents with my name on them. I said, voice trembling. Loans. I never signed. Dad, what's going on? He clicked his tongue softly. You're not well, honey. You're overwhelmed. Vanessa's situation frightened you. These conspiracies you've invented, this isn't like you. He was gaslighting me with the precision of a surgeon. I forced a shaky breath. Dad. Vanessa's missing. Another pause. This one colder. She'll turn up, he said finally. She always does. She was scared, I whispered. Really scared. You don't know what you're talking about, he snapped. Vanessa makes bad choices. I've spent years cleaning them up. Now you're running around believing fantasies and what? I asked softly. And becoming inconvenient. His breath caught. He hadn't expected that tone. Elise, he said more carefully. You need help. Let me bring you home. Let me handle things. Hale doesn't have to be involved. My stomach dropped. Hale. Silence again. He realized his mistake too late. "You said the name," I whispered. "Dad, you said Hale." He cleared his throat roughly. "You misheard. I didn't." I could almost hear him recalculating on the other side of the line. "Elise," he said lower now, "this isn't a game. Powerful people are involved, people who don't forgive mistakes. And that's why they went after Vanessa." His breath shook just slightly. "Don't say her name on unsecured lines." That told me everything. "Dad," I whispered, letting fear lace my words. "Are they coming for me too?" This was it, the moment he'd either lie or reveal the truth through panic. But Harold didn't panic. Instead, his voice went eerily calm. "They just want their money." I closed my eyes. "The 280,000. He scoffed. "Don't be naive. Vanessa owes more than that. How much?" He hesitated. "How much, Dad?" "Over 600, he finally muttered. "Maybe more." Vanessa dug herself into something she didn't understand. "They wanted collateral. And you were convenient," I finished. "Elise." "Why me?" My voice cracked real this time. "Why did you put me in this?" "Because you don't break," he said quietly. "Vanessa crumbles. Your mother collapses. But you people trust you. Banks trust you. You've always been the dependable one." A chill crawled up my spine. "You used that against me. I used it for the family," he corrected. No remorse. No hesitation. "Where's Vanessa?" I asked, forcing myself to sound small again. "You don't need to know that." "I do. Elise," he said sharply. "Come home. Stop digging. You'll only make things worse. Worse for who?" Before I could push further, his tone shifted, turning darker, colder. "You're in over your head. Hale's men don't like being defied. And neither do I." My throat closed. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm warning you," he said. "The more noise you make, the harder this becomes for all of us." I let my breath hitch. "I'm scared, Dad." "Good," he said. "Fear keeps you from doing something stupid." He softened his voice. "Just come home, Elise. We'll present your disappearance as exhaustion. Stress. We'll say you were taken advantage of. People will believe it. You've always looked fragile." Fragile? The word stung worse than any threat. "I need time," I whispered. "You don't have time," he replied. A knock echoed faintly in the background on his end. Urgent. 3 sharp raps. "Dad," I whispered. He inhaled sharply. "I have to go." "Who's there?" "Don't contact me again until you're ready to cooperate." And the line cut. The room felt still as a held breath. Julian leaned forward. He slipped. More than once. Nora nodded. "And whoever knocked? That wasn't your mother." I pressed a hand to my chest, steadying myself. "He's scared," I whispered. Scared enough to say Hale's name, scared enough to admit the debt, scared enough to warn me. Julian watched me carefully. "What does that tell you?" I exhaled slowly. "That if Harold Brooks is afraid," I said, lifting my eyes to meet theirs, "then Hale is far worse than we imagined." And somewhere in that terrifying truth, a spark inside me shifted. Not fear. Determination. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Harold's voice replaying in my mind, calm, confident, calling me fragile, telling me Hale didn't forgive mistakes. By dawn, exhaustion had settled deep into my bones, but clarity had taken shape too. If Hale was the shadow behind everything, then we needed to drag him into the light. Julian arrived at Nora's office before sunrise, a thick folder tucked under his arm. His expression was grim. "I found something," he said, "a link between Hale Consortium and your father that goes back farther than we thought." Nora poured him coffee. "How far?" 10 years, Julian said. "Maybe more." He spread documents across the table, records of wire transfers disguised as consulting fees, investment withdrawals routed through shell firms, receipts with suspicious timing. On several of them, Vanessa's name was listed. On others, mine. How, I asked. I never signed anything from 10 years ago. Julian nodded. Exactly. This is long-term identity patterning. They've been using bits of your information, old addresses, expired documents, signatures pulled from school files to build a false financial profile. Why me? I whispered. He hesitated. Because Hale doesn't like unpredictable people. Vanessa is emotional, volatile, but you steady, organized, reliable. Banks don't question someone like you. Nora squeezed my shoulder. They built a shadow version of you, Elise. One to carry risk, while the real you lived your life unaware. A chill crawled across my skin. Julian continued flipping through documents. One sheet stopped him mid-motion. This, he said, sliding it toward me, is the key. It was a ledger, dense numbers, coded entries, initials. VB for Vanessa Brooks, HB for Harold Brooks, and EB for me. Next to my initials were dates, 5 of them corresponding to loans I didn't know existed. I swallowed. So they planned for me to be responsible even if Vanessa disappeared. Julian met my gaze. Exactly. Before I could respond, Nora's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and stiffened. It's your mother. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mother never called me. She left all communication to Harold. Answer it, Julian said softly. We need to know where she stands. Nora set the phone on speaker and slid it across the table. I picked up. Mom. A shaky breath crackled through the line. Elise. Hearing her voice made something ache deep inside me. There was fear in it. Real fear. Mom, are you okay? No, she whispered. No, everything is falling apart. Your father, he's saying awful things. That you're ungrateful, unstable. He says you're ruining the family. I swallowed hard. And what do you think silence stretched? When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. I think he's scared, and when he's scared, he lies. My chest tightened. It had taken her 30 years to admit that truth. Mom, I said Vanessa is missing. I know, she whispered. Your father says she's hiding, but I don't believe him. I saw his face when he got that call last week. He went pale. He locked himself in his office. He didn't come out for hours. What call? I asked sharply. A tremor filled her voice. Someone told him he needed to produce the money by the end of the month. Or they would come for the collateral. Collateral. Me. Julian exchanged a dark look with Nora. Mom, I asked carefully, do you know who contacted him? They wouldn't give a name, she said, but your father kept repeating one word under his breath. Hale. I felt the room tilt slightly. My mother's breath hitched again. Elise, please don't come home. Don't let your father find you. And don't call from any number he knows. I don't know what he's capable of anymore. Her voice broke into a quiet sob. I wanted to reach through the phone to comfort her the way she never comforted me. But before I could say anything, another voice echoed faintly behind her. A man's voice. Sharp. Commanding. Who are you talking to, Harold? My mother inhaled sharply. I have to go. The line went dead. Julian exhaled slowly. Your mother is scared of him. She's finally waking up, Nora said. I wasn't sure whether to feel relief or grief. Julian closed the ledger. Elise, you now have proof that your father's been involved with Hale for years, enough to interest federal investigators. Something inside me hardened. Then let's give them everything. We're not going straight to the feds, Julian said. Not yet. We need leverage. Something Hale can't destroy. What kind of leverage, I asked. Evidence he doesn't know we found, Julian said. The recorder from the storage unit, the one with Vanessa's voice. The ledgers, emails, wire logs. If we can connect these to Hale's offshore network, we have a case. And if we don't, I whispered. Then Hale will make the first move, he said. And you won't like it. The air in the room shifted colder now. As we began sorting the files into piles, Julian's burner phone buzzed. He frowned. What is it? Nora asked. He turned the screen toward us. Unknown number. One sentence. Stop digging, Elise. You're next. My blood ran cold. Did they trace us? I whispered. No, Julian said. They don't need to. They just need you afraid. I stared at the message, feeling something old and familiar rise inside me, the version of myself Harold spent years training quiet. Obedient. Afraid. But then a different voice rose within me, stronger now. They used you. They erased you. They built a fake version of you to carry their debts, and now they think fear will stop you. I lifted my chin. They want me to run, I said, so they can control the narrative. Julian nodded. Exactly. Then I'm done running. I stood from the table, closing the ledger with a decisive snap. What now? Nora asked. I felt something ignite inside me, resolve sharp enough to cut. Now, I said, we expose them. And for the first time, the fear didn't swallow me. It fueled me. We spent the next morning in Nora's office, surrounded by stacks of files, printouts, and encrypted drives, each one a thread in the knot Harold and Hale had tied around my life. The heater hummed softly against the cold, but my hands still trembled as I sifted through ledger pages. Not from fear, at least not entirely, but from the weight of everything I was preparing to do. Julian finally broke the silence. It's time to contact him. Hale, I asked. No, Julian said. Harold. You need to pull him out of whatever lie he's hiding behind, and you need him to tell you where Vanessa is. My stomach tightened. You want me to bait my own father again? Julian nodded. He's already slipping. Last night proved that. Push a little deeper and he'll reveal what he's desperate to hide. Nora placed a reassuring hand on my arm. We'll record everything. Abby's preparing the legal strategy in case he tries anything immediately after. I stared at my burner phone, feeling the old fear pulse inside my ribs. All those years of being the steady daughter, the one who didn't question, didn't push back, didn't inconvenience anyone, Harold had counted on that version of me still existing. But she was gone now. Julian handed me a script, bullet points, nothing too specific. Let him fill in the gaps. The guilty always do. I dialed. He answered on the first ring. Elise. His voice cracked just slightly. Dad, I whispered. You need to come home, right now. His tone shifted immediately, commanding, controlling. We can fix everything. The Hale situation, the money, Vanessa's mess. Is she alive? I cut in. Silence. Heavy. Filled with everything he didn't want to say out loud. Why would you ask me something like that? He finally snapped. Because you know more than you've told me. Elise, he said, voice tightening. You are being manipulated. I heard her, I said. In the recording. From the storage unit you claimed you didn't know about. The silence sharpened. When he spoke again, his voice shook with anger. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Then explain it, I said softly. Tell me the truth. He exhaled long and frustrated. Vanessa owed more than she could repay. Hale stepped in. They offered options. She didn't take them. What options? You don't want to know. Yes, I said. I do. His voice dropped to a whisper. She was supposed to move assets for them. Illegal ones. She panicked. She tried to walk away. I closed my eyes, the ache inside me growing. And they punished her. They warned her. He corrected sharply. Warned both of you. She didn't listen. You didn't protect her. I said. He slammed something, maybe a desk. I did everything I could. I didn't flinch this time. The old Elise would have. She would have apologized just to calm him. But now, I let his anger hang in the air, exposed and ugly. You gave Hale my identity, I whispered. He froze. I heard it in the stillness. Elise, he said quietly, you were never supposed to find out. Those words broke something inside me. Where is she? I asked again. Where's Vanessa? He hesitated. Then safe. But the way he said it felt like a lie wrapped in denial. Dad, tell me the truth. You want the truth, he shouted. Fine. She's in protective custody. My breath caught. Police custody. No, he said, voice trembling. Hale's protection. A cold wave washed over me. That's not protection. It is compared to the alternative, he muttered. And what's the alternative? He didn't answer. The line crackled someone else in the room with him, the faint, muffled sound of a second voice. Not my mother. Dad, who is that? Don't call again, he barked. You're only making things worse. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. What did he say? Julian asked. I repeated each word. His jaw tightened. He's lying, Julian said. Vanessa isn't with Hale for protection. She's leverage. Nora pushed her hair back, fear clouding her face. So what now? If Hale knows we're pulling records, won't he? Yes, Julian said. He'll escalate. As if cued by the universe, the office lights flickered. Then Nora's security system pinged loudly from the hallway tablet. Motion detected west lot. My breath hitched. Julian rushed to the window, peering through the blinds. Black SUV, he said. Same as the storage facility. My pulse thundered. He followed us. Nora grabbed her phone. I'm calling the police. Julian held up a hand. Wait. They won't intervene unless there's a threat. Is a man stalking us not a threat? She demanded. He didn't answer. Not because he disagreed, but because he was listening. A car door shut outside. Footsteps approached. Julian backed away from the blinds. Get away from the windows. We moved deeper into the office, hearts pounding. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Then a knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps. Nora clutched my arm. Elise. My entire body felt suspended as if my bones were no longer connected. The knock came again. Julian gestured for silence and crept forward. He looked through the peephole, stiffened, then motioned us back. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and furious. It's not Hale's man. Then who is it? I whispered. Julian stepped back, jaw clenched. Your father. My breath collapsed inward. He found you, Nora whispered. No, Julian said. He was brought here. A beat of silence. Then he added, Hale sent him. Julian didn't open the door. Not at first. He motioned for silence, his eyes sharp, calculating. My heartbeat pulsed so loudly I could barely hear anything else. For years, Harold Brooks had been the immovable force in my life, the man who bent every story, every memory, every version of me into a shape that suited him. But seeing his shadow under Nora's office door, knowing Hale had sent him, stripped away any illusion that he still held power. Julian finally cracked the door, keeping the chain latched. Mr. Brooks, he said. You shouldn't be here. Harold shoved at the door, wild-eyed. Let me in. I need to speak to my daughter. His voice wasn't confident anymore. It trembled, and for a moment I saw something I'd never seen in him before, fear that wasn't directed outward but inward, like he was afraid of what he'd become. Julian refused. Say what you need to say from there. Harold leaned toward the gap, breathing hard. Elise, sweetheart. Please. They're watching me. They followed me here. They said if I didn't convince you to stop, they'd... He cut himself off. eyes darting behind him as if someone might be standing there. "Dad," I said softly, stepping close. "Where is Vanessa?" His breath shook. "I don't know anymore. You told me Hale was protecting her." "That's what they told me to say," he whispered, voice raw. "I thought I could control things. I thought I could negotiate. I thought," his voice cracked. "I was wrong. I've lost control of all of it." Years of resentment tangled inside me, but I pushed them aside. "Why did you drag me into this?" His eyes filled not with remorse, but with the dawning realization that he had destroyed something he never believed could break. "You were always the strong one," he said. "And I needed someone strong." I swallowed the ache in my throat. "Dad, that's not strength. That's exploitation." He bowed his head against the doorframe. "Elise, help me. Please. They're going to kill me." Julian gently stepped between us. "Mr. Brooks, you need to leave before you lead them here." Harold grabbed the edge of the door. "They already know she's here." Every muscle in my body froze. Before Julian could respond, a car engine roared outside. Tires screeched. A door slammed. Heavy footsteps approached the building. Julian snapped into motion. "Back now." He shut the door, locked every bolt, and killed the lights. Nora grabbed my arm, pulling me deeper into the office. The only illumination came from the blinking red light of the security panel. The footsteps stopped right outside. Then a violent pounding shook the door. "Open it!" a deep voice barked. Now Harold whimpered, collapsing against the wall. "It's them!" "Elise, please," Julian drew us behind a filing cabinet. "Police are on their way," Nora whispered, pressing a silent alarm. The pounding grew louder. Metal creaked under the pressure. "Elise Brooks," the voice called. "We just want to talk." A lie so thin it might as well have been smoke. The pounding stopped. For a moment, the world stilled, the kind of quiet that feels like the breath before a storm. Then distant sirens wailed through the night. The footsteps retreated fast, controlled, disappearing around the corner. Minutes later, police cars flooded the parking lot in a wash of blue and white. Officers stormed the building, escorting us outside. Harold was taken aside for questioning, shaking so hard he couldn't stand without help. I stood on the sidewalk, arms wrapped around myself, watching the SUV peel away from the far end of the lot. Hale's reach was wider than I'd imagined. But so was mine now. Julian faced me. "This ends tonight." "We have enough evidence for federal involvement," Nora added. "The recordings, the ledger trail, the identity forgeries, this isn't just a family issue anymore." By morning, federal agents had raided Hale's Denver office. Another team found Vanessa alive, shaken, but safe in a remote cabin used by Hale's associates. She was taken into protective custody. When I finally saw her tucked under blankets, eyes swollen from exhaustion, she looked at me like a child again. "Elise," her voice wavered. "You came." I took her hand. I was always going to come. The agents later told me that Vanessa's cooperation sealed Hale's fate. He was arrested alongside his financial network. Harold, cornered by evidence of conspiracy and fraud, negotiated a deal less prison time in exchange for testifying against Hale's inner circle. My mother moved to a relative's home out of state, choosing quiet over chaos. As for me, I returned to Portwell weeks later, not as someone running, but as someone who had survived something designed to break her. I rented a small apartment near the ocean, started volunteering at a women's financial resource center. Shared parts of my story, not the darkest parts, but enough to help others see the traps they didn't yet recognize. One evening, as I sat on the balcony overlooking the water, a soft knock sounded at my door. It was Vanessa. She didn't say anything at first. She just stepped forward and hugged me tight, trembling, grateful in a way I'd never felt from her before. "I'm trying to be better," she whispered. "We both are," I said. We watched the waves roll in and out, pulled by a force bigger than either of us. life reshaping itself. I realized then that I wasn't the woman who'd walked into that Christmas dinner believing she owed her family everything. I wasn't the daughter who feared confrontation. I wasn't the sister who held everyone else's weight. I was someone new, someone who'd learned that walking away isn't abandonment, it's survival. And choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's power. If you've stayed with me through this whole journey, I want to hear from you. Tell me, have you ever had to break away from someone who was supposed to love you? Have you ever reclaimed your life after someone tried to control it? Share your story in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, follow the channel so we can walk through the next one together. Because sometimes telling our stories is the first step toward taking our power back.